Hi, BookTube, and welcome to another fiction review. Speaking on behalf of my own particular environs, spring has officially started, in that it has stopped raining for a reasonable period of time, and the temperature in centigrade is successfully remaining in the high teens and early 20s. I have excavated my sandals from my closet. Every tree and shrub that can flower is flowering, and we are leaving out more mealworms for the birds in our garden, so they have a source of protein to feed their chicks. I can recall a few occasions when I have attended funerals that were held in May. It creates a weird mental discord to be dressed in black when the sun is shining, when birds are doing more singing than usual, when you can see lambs in the fields and you're watching all the active bees and butterflies smell all the flowers that they're visiting, and yet there you are, gathered with a lot of other somber people around a coffin. It reminds you that other activities may be seasonal. They may have their time and their place, or they may fit some kind of pattern, but death is random, and it does not always make sense or seem right. You'll see that it'll be useful to keep that contradictory springtime funeral concept in the back of your mind as we look at today's novel. Today, we will be reading Momento, Mori by Muriel Spark, published first in 1959, but I was reading the 2017 hardback edition, which was published by Polygon, which is an imprint of Berlin Limited, Edinburgh. Can I pitch this novel? My pitch will sound more like a warning, okay? Be careful. Be careful, particularly if you have a taste for genre fiction involving crime or intrigue, particularly if you've read a fair number of detective mystery novels written in English between the First and Second World Wars by authors like Agatha Christie, Dorothy L. Sayers, Eric Stanley Gardner, Ellery Queen, etc. Those novels have situational setups and conventions, and I believe Muriel Spark plays with some of these conventions. She uses them in Momento Mori, but not with the intention of fulfilling the expectations of popular mystery readers. The design of Spark's novel is to create and hold a state of uncertainty. I would describe it almost as an indignant feeling that might come over you at the halfway point, maybe earlier, where I found myself asking, what's going on here? What's actually happening? I will even admit to some anxiety, wondering had I missed some important piece of information earlier on in the book, which would help it make sense now. Until I finished the novel and looked back on it, I did not recognize that my feelings were much like the feelings of the characters as they reacted to the strange phone calls and the unknown person on the other end of the line who always advises them, remember, you must die before they hang up. But before we say more about that, let's talk about the details. Momento Mori, the 2017 hardback edition that I read, is 222 pages long. The font is 12 point, but the spacing is compact. This edition included a 5-page foreword that had a biography of Muriel Spark and an introduction by Zoe Strachan that should be saved until you finish the book. And publishers, can I put it out there? I don't know who would even be listening to me, but why don't we change the convention? And when some lovely expert person writes a piece of analysis about a novel, let's put it at the end of the novel, because that's the logical place when people should be reading it, not before. The book was on my Read What You Own Amazon wish list, and it's an example of the willpower that is holding so far, okay? Because I saw Momento Mori while browsing in the Stratford-on-Avon branch of Waterstones. I didn't realize that Muriel Spark had written more than The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. I'd never seen any other books on a bookstore shelf written by her. And the title, of course, intrigued me. It reminded me of the Momento Mori tag that David at Polyglot Reading created. The temptation to buy did not overwhelm me, and that was a really good thing, because a few weeks later, while browsing at my local library, I discovered there was a copy of Momento Mori on the shelves that I could borrow, and so it came home with me. My bank account and my bookshelves have been spared. I will give an abridged version of the biography that appeared at the front of my copy. Muriel Spark was born Muriel Camberg in 1918 in Edinburgh. She had a working class background. It was not deprived, but money was always tight. Muriel was educated at James Gillespie's High School for Girls. It's a school that's still open, it's still state-funded, and it has an impressive list of famous alumni. I will leave a link to that list in my description box. It was at James Gillespie's that Muriel met the inspirational teacher Christina Kay, on whom the character of Miss Jean Brodie is based. It was Kay who insisted that Muriel must become a writer. Muriel did not attend university. She obtained some vocational skills at a local college, and she got a clerical job. There she met Sidney Oswald Spark, 13 years her senior. He wanted to teach in Africa. Now, Muriel was a little like Dorothea Brooke in George Eliot's Middlemarch. She was wanting to escape the drudgery of her life in Edinburgh, that narrow life. She wanted something larger and greater. So she followed Sidney to Rhodesia, or nowadays Zimbabwe, in 1937, and she married him there. That was a mistake. And she had to return to England as soon as it was possible. Because of the war, she couldn't return until 1944. And then she found work in London. And of course, in the capital, it was easy to get involved with the literary scene. Spark began writing poetry and short fiction. In 1957, her first novel, The Comforters, was published. 5 books followed in quick succession, and that established her reputation in the UK. But it was the prime of Miss Jean Brodie, which came out in 1961, which turned her into an internationally renowned author. Muriel then spent 6 years in New York. She was working from an office provided by her publisher, and she produced 2 further novels, one of which, The Mandelbaum Gate, was awarded the James Tate Black Memorial Prize. Spark then got tired of the bustle and crowds of New York, and she moved to Italy, settling deep in the countryside of Tuscany, and she continued to produce novels regularly until her death in 2004, aged 88. She is buried in the village of Oliveto, and the inscription on her headstone reads simply, Poeta. Setting. For this novel, think of setting in broader terms than just place. All of Spark's characters in this book live in the south of England. They're in areas of London like Kensington and Chelsea, where properties are more expensive, or they're in the Surrey countryside or on the Isle of Wight. These are locations with reputations in the UK, right? They are class-coded as places where wealthy people live. So all the characters in the novel are comfortably off, or they're people hanging around the wealthy people in the hope of becoming comfortably off. They are characters mainly accustomed to having things go their own way, accustomed to having influence and control, or very good at the kind of manipulation which results in much the same thing. The time period is the 1950s, so the Second World War is over and the world is a different place. Before the war, Charmian Colston was a best-selling writer of novels with sweet endings. This is how one of them is described. I'm reading from page 186. I have just been rereading The Seventh Child. I love particularly that scene at the end with Edna in her mackintosh, standing at the cliff's edge on that Hebridean coast, being drenched by the spray and her hair blown about her face, and then turning to find Carl at her side. One thing about your lovers, Charmian, they never required any preliminary discussions. They just looked at each other and knew. That, said Charmian, is one of the things Eric cannot stand. Eric is Charmian's son. He also became an author, but his books, they contain, quote, a hard streak of realism and no charity. They're books more suited for the Cold War world. It's also true that setting in this novel is a time of life. Virtually all the characters are over the age of 70. This means they have a lot of history behind them, and they know a lot of things about each other, secret things. It means death is a reality drawing much closer, which heightens the anxiety. And all of these setting factors, along with the strange phone calls, would be the perfect setup for an Agatha Christie novel, would it not? And Christie fans may feel initially that this is what they're going to get. And it's worth saying here that Christie was a great admirer of Muriel Spark's writing, and that appreciation was most likely mutual. I'm going to leave a link in my description box. It goes to a YouTube video, a talk given by Gray Robert Brown, who's a writer, podcaster, and Christie enthusiast, where he compares the work of both writers, and he suggests that 3 of Christie's later novels may have drawn their inspiration from Momento Mori. Narrative viewpoint is third-person omniscient. Omniscience opens every character to you, the reader, so that you alone know their secrets, their flaws, their weaknesses, their compromises, their attachments, and their joys. At the beginning and at the end of the book, the reader is told, or reminded, if you were Christian, of the catechism question, what are the last 4 things to be remembered? And they are, in order, death, judgment, hell, and heaven. The reader is not death. Every death that you come to in the novel will be a surprise. But by the end of the book, every reader can act as judge. They will have plenty of material from which to draw a conclusion about the characters. The narrative voice is straightforward. It's businesslike. It's not aiming to impress, but to inform. The abundance of shorter sentences in some places reminded me of the messages that people used to put on telegrams, where the charge varied by the number of words, and so brevity always cost less money. Even where the sentences lengthen, Spark keeps her word choices and her clause construction simple. It suggests that it mattered to her to convey her meaning tidily. She pokes fun at wordiness in her portrayal of the aging poet Percy Mannering, who always chooses the wrong setting or the wrong medium for his long-winded messages, and he does not know when it's better to hold back a bit. Does this novel fit a genre label? We'll remember that my library hardcover edition included an introduction written by Zoe Strachan, and she says in there, one of the many delights of reading a Muriel Spark novel is the way in which the ground shifts so delicately under the reader's feet. Strachan allows that Momento Mori has a veneer of coziness, but like all veneers, it would be wrong to mistake it for the real thing. And this is what stands out for me about this novel, because I'm going to admit, some years back, I read a book that shifted the ground in kind of the same way. It upended my genre expectations, and I felt annoyed when I finished that book. And it wasn't just because the text led me to think we were going in a certain direction in terms of genre, but the cover graphics and the back cover write-up, they all led me to think that I was getting an espionage thriller. And this deserves comment because Muriel Spark's novels, these editions that you can see illustrated here, they are not presented or marketed as mystery novels. And Gray Robert Brown, in the video that I've linked to, he suggests that they should, and I disagree. I feel that genre marketing is a form of advertising. And whether we like that or we don't, we do have to recognize that some people are purchasing books as products. And because they're purchasing a product, they expect the genre conventions to be upheld. That is the product that they want to buy, and I think it would harm rather than help Muriel Spark's reputation if readers came to her books and they weren't prepared to be open to what she is doing with genre expectations. Problematic content. Whether you think this book has problematic content will depend upon how distressing you find depictions of death in fiction. There is one death. It's briefly described, but it is frightening and violent. And because there's been nothing else quite as dark preceding it, you know, the novel keeps a certain coziness. It's slightly off, but until that point, you were kind of going with it. And this particular scene, it's evidence of what Zoe Strachan was saying in her introduction, that the ground shifts kind of dramatically underneath you. And so that can be quite disturbing. But that's the only scene that I can really call problematic. What is the context of that problematic content? Spark has been called a cruel writer, and I agree with Gray Robert Brown when he says that he thinks that judgment is harsh. And it's harsh because it assumes that any writer who touches on the darker, the random, and the less happy aspects of human existence is somehow distorting the truth about being human. I'm going to speculate, and I'm going to say also that what readers might find cruel is the way Spark will set up one kind of expectation and then blast it away with scenes like the problematic one. Scenes where she'll start in what feels like one kind of genre direction and then veer off, start with crime, and then shift into literary. I'm going to read an example. It's a longer scene, longer extract, starting from page 62, which I think should illustrate this strange expectation shift. She recalled an afternoon, years ago in 1928, long after the love affair, when she had been attending Charmian on a weekend party in the country, and Alec Warner was a fellow guest. One afternoon, he had taken Jean Taylor off for a walk. Most of their conversation she had forgotten, but she recalled his first question. "Do you think, Jean, that other people exist?" She had not at once understood the nature of the question. For a moment she had wondered if his words might in some way refer to that love affair 20-odd years earlier, and his further words. "I mean, Jean, do you consider that the people around us, are real or illusory?" This did not fit with her knowledge of the man. Even at the time of their love relationship, he was not the type to proffer the conceit, "There is no one in the world but we two, we alone exist." And besides, she who was now walking beside this middle-aged man was herself a woman in her early 50s. "What do you mean?" she said. "Only what I say." They had come to a beechwood which was damp from last night's storm. Every now and then a little succession of raindrops would pelt from the leaves onto his hat or her hat. He took her arm and led her off the main path, so that for all her sober sense, it rapidly crossed her mind that he might be a murderer, a maniac. But she had in the next instant recalled her 50 years and more. Were they not usually young women who were strangled in woods by sex maniacs? No, she thought again, sometimes they were women of 50-odd. The leaves squelched beneath their feet. Her mind flashed messages to itself back and forth. "But I know him well, he's Alec Warner. Do I know him, though? He is odd, even as a lover he was strange, but he is known everywhere. His reputation. Still, some eminent men have secret vices. No one ever finds them out. Their very eminence is a protection." "Surely," he was saying, as he continued to draw her into the narrow, dripping shadows, "you see that here is a respectable question. Given that you believe in your own existence as self-evident, do you believe in that of others? Tell me, Jean, do you believe that I, for instance, at this moment, exist?" He peered down at her face beneath the brim of her brown felt hat. "Where are you taking me?" she said, stopping still. "Out of these wet woods," he said, "by a shortcut. Tell me, now surely you understand what I am asking. It is a plain question." She looked ahead through the trees and saw that their path was indeed a shortcut to the open fields. She realized at once that his question was entirely academic, and he was not contemplating murder with indecent assault. And what reason, after all, had she to suspect this? How things do, she thought, come and go through a woman's mind. He was an unusual man. "I agree," she said then, "that your question can be asked. One does sometimes wonder, perhaps only half-consciously, if other people are real. Please," he said, "wonder more than half-consciously about this question. Wonder about it with as much consciousness as you have, and tell me, what is your answer?" They had emerged from the wood and took a path skirting a ploughed field which led to the village. There the church with its steep, sloping graveyard stood at the top of the street. Miss Taylor looked over the wall at the graveyard as they passed it. She was not sure now if his words had been frivolous or serious or both, for even in their younger days, especially during that month of July, in 1907 at the farmhouse, she had never really known what to make of him, and had sometimes felt afraid. "This graveyard is a kind of evidence," she said, "that other people exist." "How do you mean?" he said. She was not sure. Having said it, she was not sure why. The more she wondered what she had meant, the less she knew. "I should like to see the gravestones. Let's go in by the gate." And so they had walked among the graves, stooping to read the names on the stones. "They are. I quite see they are," he said, "an indication of the existence of others, for there are the names and the times carved in stone. Not a proof, but at least a large testimony." "Of course," she said, "the gravestones might be hallucinations, but I think not." "There is that to be considered," he said, but so courteously that she became angry. "But the graves are at least reassuring," she said, "for why bother to bury people if they don't exist?" Right. Any suggestions for related or follow-up reading? I'm going to suggest this. Restless by William Boyd. This was the novel that all those years ago it troubled me. It sets us up with spy thriller expectations, and then it does something a little different. It is a very good book, and I do want to read more Boyd. But the cover art sells the book as more genre compliant than it actually is. And you've heard my opinion on that. Personally, I think Boyd's books would be better represented if the cover graphics suggested literary or general fiction rather than genre, but maybe his publisher could show me the sales figures, and that would suggest otherwise. And that's another review done. Hey, Middlemarch Meditation viewers, you are going to get another video a little sooner than you're probably expecting it, yes, because I've made a wonderful discovery that Eliot fans will want to know about, and I want to share that. So that's going to be the next video. And I have reached the halfway point in Jennifer Ackerman's The Bird Way. So following on from Middlemarch Meditation will be another nonfiction review. And then I need to tackle my 5 remaining TBR titles, and they are longer books, as I have said. If I feel the need to split my review into a multi-part vlog, I will do that because I really want to keep my twice weekly content consistent. I'm off now because I've got to catch some of this May sunshine that's outside, okay? So I'll see you guys in a little while. Take care. Bye-bye.